Come on, let's go visit a fort today. It's a fort with very interesting history. Fort Pulaski National Monument is right off of Tybee Island. It's actually located on Cockspur Island, which is really close to Savannah, Georgia. It is a very significant historical site, and it's got a beautiful fort with the moats going all around it, and on this island with nice salt marshes and things to see. It is a beautiful place to go, and it's not very far off of Interstate 95, so it's a nice, easy little side trip to go right to the fort. It is actually off of Highway 80. You come in on Highway 80 and you make this turn into a short bridge that gets you to Cockspur Island. And pretty soon you get there and you see the visitor center, and the fort is right behind it. Now, the island itself has a few paths that you can go to, a few markers and monuments, and there's actually a path that leads you to the Cockspur Lighthouse that you can see. It's not open, but you can see from the outside. Those are kind of interesting, but the main attraction is the fort itself. Now, the fort is got 5 sides, so I look at it as a hexagon, which I know it's got 6 sides, but if you cut a hexagon in half, and the back end is one side, you basically got a 5-sided building, or not building, but a 5-sided fort that you can walk around in. You basically come from the visitor center, you go down this path along the moat, and there's a path going all the way around the moat if you want to. And then you kind of get into the fort via this nice archway with a drawbridge, the traditional drawbridge over the moat kind of a thing. And you get in there, and on one side of it, the back side of it where you enter is where all the quarters are, where all the mess hall is, where all the people live, where the infirmary is, where the commander's quarter is, and so on and so forth. And on the other side are a bunch of places for cannons and things that would defend the fort with a fairly large area in the middle that you can, flat ground, you can do things in, you can walk around in and do all those things. The view itself from the top of the fort is nice, but it's not really spectacular, but it's kind of nice. The fort's got a very interesting history. It was built as part of a system called the Third System Forts. Now, the origin of the Third System Fort is after the War of 1812, when the government, federal government realized that they really should do more to defend the coastline of the United States. James Madison, the president, decided to establish a whole system of forts. There's actually 42 of them in all, going from Maine all the way down to Florida, around the Gulf Coast. And then there are 2 forts over on the San Francisco Bay Area. And there are a few famous forts that are still well preserved today. One of them is actually a national park, the flagship national park, Dry Tortugas National Park in an island, Dry Tortugas Island in the middle of Gulf of Mexico, that's got Fort Jefferson, which is part of this system. And another example of the fort is Fort Macon, which is a state park in North Carolina. And of course, a lot of people know about Fort Alcatraz over by San Francisco Bay. So Fort Pulaski is one of the forts in the southeast Atlantic coast that is very well preserved. Now, the fort itself was started in 1829, and it was supposed to cost $1 million and supposed to have 25 million bricks. And would you believe it that it took them 18 years to finish this fort? And that's just to finish it. It's not to provide cannons and armaments and stuff like that. So it took 18 years from 1829 to actually finish the fort, and they still took them a long time to try to arm it with cannons and stuff. And even in 1860, it was still not fully armed. Now, remember in 1860, 61, the Civil War, all that. So the federal government of the United States never occupied the fort initially. In order for them to occupy the fort, they ended up having to conquer it and attack it. In 1861, in January of 1861, 2 weeks after South Carolina seceded from the Union, the governor of Georgia decided that he's going to send his militia in to take over the fort ahead of the federal government. So he went and took over the fort, and 2 weeks later, on January 19th, Georgia seceded from the Union as well. And at that time, the governor of Georgia turned the fort over to the Confederate Army. So now the Confederates have the fort, and then they garrisoned it, they armed it with cannons and stuff like that. They occupy the fort to defend Georgia, because at that point, any ship that goes into Savannah has to go past the south channel of the Savannah River, and that's where the fort is defending. The south channel is actually the river that goes between Coxsborough Island, where the fort is, and Tybee Island, and that's a kind of a choke point. In November of 1861, the Union Army attacked and ended up being able to get on Hilton Head Island, which is just north, about 15 miles north of the fort. And they took that over and started using that as a base with which to attack, plan an attack on Fort Pulaski, as well as the entire South Atlantic coast. When the Confederates saw what was happening, they were very worried about being attacked. And at that point, they occupied both the fort as well as the Tybee Island coastline. And they decided to retreat from the Tybee Island coast, because they thought, hey, Tybee Island is a mile away from the fort. They weren't going to be able to do too much to hurt the fort. Now, as soon as the Union Army realized that the Confederates have moved out of Tybee Island, they moved right in and started the plan to attack Fort Pulaski from there. The Union Army started setting up camp to attack Fort Pulaski in January of 1862, and in February of 1862, Colonel Gilmore took over as a commander of the army at that point. On April 10th of 1862, he asked and demanded that Colonel Umstead of the Confederate that was commander of the fort to surrender. Now, Colonel, if you can think about it, if you were Colonel Umstead, right? He says, okay, I am in this fort. By the way, the fort was considered to be invincible, because it's got 7.5-foot walls, and for brick and masonry fort at the time, it was considered to be very strong and invincible. So Colonel Umstead decided, hey, I'm just going to sit here. They can, try to bombard me. They're never going to be able to reach, because at that point, anything that's over 1,000 yards was considered too far for the cannons to reach. So I'm just going to sit back here and I'm going to fire them. They get any closer and everything's fine. He was not worried at all. But Colonel Gilmore has a trick up his sleeve. Unbeknownst to the Confederate Army, Colonel Gilmore has what's called rifle cannons, 10 of them, that was brand new at the time, that he wanted to use to attack the fort. Now, from there to the southeast corner of the fort, it's about a mile. And so he started firing. He knew that he can fire at the corner and these rifle cannons are supposed to come in spinning and to be able to kind of drill a hole on the side of the brick fort here. So when he was refused, he decided, okay, I'm going to attack. And on April 11th, 1862, he started firing and attacking the fort. And it didn't take a long time before the southeast corner of the fort was crumbling. The actual fort, because of these rifle cannons, was actually crumbling and opening up a big gaping hole. And obviously, Colonel Umstead of the Confederate was very surprised and very worried, because now, without the fort's protection and knowing that they can actually reach a mile to destroy it, he had no way out and he can't really do anything, and he was not being able to get reinforcements. So after he realized that the Union Army knew where his powder magazine was in the fort and very worried that it would be attacked, and ended up blowing up the whole fort and killing all of the people that's in the fort, after 30 hours of bombardment, he raised the white flag to surrender. And Colonel Gilmore from the Union came in and they actually signed the unconditional surrender agreement in Colonel Umstead's quarters, which has got an exhibit right in the fort that shows exactly where this was signed. So that battle in 1862 was the only battle that Fort Pulaski saw. After the battle, of course, the Union Army won. They garrisoned the fort until the end of the war, and the Colonel Umstead's people, 340 some of them, was transferred to Governors Island, New York as prisoners of war, and eventually was exchanged later on in 1862. Now, afterwards, the fort was used for a time to be a political prison, and by 1880, the only people that was there are the caretakers of the fort and of the nearby lighthouse. And then soon after that, it was not very useful, so that it was largely abandoned until 1923, when the fort was designated a national monument. Like all National Park Service sites, Fort Pulaski is an interesting place to visit with lots of historical significance, and really an exhibit that reminds you of the history of the United States, and in this particular case of the Civil War. It is an interesting place to visit to learn about the history and be able to actually see what things looked like back then. It is certainly well worth the visit to spend a couple hours on the grounds to learn about history. We are on our way to visit all the national parks in the United States. Follow along by hitting the subscribe button below. Hit the notification bell so you know when a new video is released. Give it a thumbs up if you like this video, and please share it with everybody that you know.